thank you for being here for lunch as well. I have the sad news that on the agenda, PJ Hill was going to be here. PJ made the mistake of testing for COVID, and he tested positive. I say made the mistake in that I told this to one of our colleagues at Hoover, and he said, well, that was a mistake. He just, why did he test? But it's like a common cold or flu, I guess, almost treated that way now. And when you have that, you're somewhat reluctant to just cough in someone else's face. So anyway, PJ's at home nursing a mild case of being very tired, which is kind of what I am most days. Anyway, PJ's not here, and I'll just interject that when I asked Nick, should I take over for him, Nick said, you're going to speak about morality? I decided, okay, that's probably not my forte. So I will turn it over to Peter Robinson, who is the best moderator, discussion leader I've ever known. And even without having the best moderator, discussion leader, Victor Davis Hanson can take on any topic and do it well. So I will turn it over to them and thank them both. They're two of my favorite people. So, Peter.
Victor needs no introduction, but I do want you to know that he has another book coming out. And Victor is known, as I'm sure you're aware, for the sheer cheerfulness of his titles. You're familiar with his classic on the Peloponnesian War, A War Like No Other, Carnage and Culture, The Dying Citizen, and this brings us to the book that will be published on May 7th, The End of Everything. How Wars Descend into Annihilation. And on that cheerful note, Victor.
Yes.
All right. I have 4 questions for you, Victor. And since you being you, I'm sure we will only get to 2 or 3. If you'd like to learn the 4th, $50 in an envelope mailed to me here at the Hoover Institution. I'll mail you back the 4th question. Here's the first question. The morality of markets versus mandates, trade, free trade. Now, let me take just a moment to set this up with 2 quotations, and the first comes from Hoover fellow Bjorn Lomborg. Bjorn, stand up and say hello. Thank you. Bjorn's new book, Best Things First. Here's the quotation. As trade increases the GDP of a country, it also increases incomes. Bjorn cites China, which cut tariffs from an average of 32% in 1992 to 2.5% in 2020, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty. India cut tariffs from 56% in 1990 to 6% in 2020 and saw incomes quadruple. As Bjorn notes in his book, South Korea, Chile, Vietnam, declining trade barriers, to quote him once again, have been a feature of virtually all rapid growth developing countries in the past half century. Close. All right, now that sounds like simple, straightforward, perhaps even cold and calculating economics. But here comes the matter of morality. To quote Bjorn once again, quote, one study shows that over the past 4 decades of economic growth, the bottom 20% and the bottom 40% generally rose in the same proportion as the mean economic growth in the country itself. As the whole economy grows, the poor become better off. That's Bjorn Lomborg. Here's the second quotation, Donald J. Trump. I'm a big believer in tariffs. China was taking advantage of us on steel. They were destroying our entire steel industry. I put a 50% tax on China's steel, and every person in the steel industry, when they see me, they start crying. They would hug me, close quote. Victor, whose argument is more moral?
Would you allow me to have an anecdote to illustrate the ambiguity of this?
Go right ahead.
So I was farming, when I got a PhD, I farmed for 5 years full time, and I farmed raisins. And in 1980, the EU started to subsidize all raisins. And that meant that we were getting $1,400 a ton, and they were paying the farmer about $1,600 and adding an $800 discount to people around the world that bought EU raisins, mostly Turkish, kind of EU, but mostly Greek and Spanish. So the price of raisins went from $1,400 to $400 in 1981. And it stayed that way for 10 years. And we had a patchwork of small farms, and everybody we grew up with, to be stereotyped, had no keys to the doors. And they had Little League, and there were these farm families of 40 or 80. And so Sun-Made Cooperative, that my great-grandfather was a charter member, went broke, owed us $90,000, just went broke and recapitalized. So they brought a member from the Reagan administration, and he said, who cares about 5,000 farmers? But he spoke. So I was an asshole, a smart ass at 26, and I said, could I ask a question? I believe in market capitalism, but the EU is subsidizing, and they're not paying anything close to 2% for their NATO, and they're killing us, and they're anti-American. Why do you let these things in? Because you've destroyed this whole community. It's all latifundia now. Everybody is selling out to these vertically integrated concerns. They got walnuts, pistachios, they have packing houses, they have trucking, they have processing. And they control the product. They lose money on the farming, and they make it on this and it was just starting globally. And he said something to him I'll never forget. He said, this is good for you. This is creative destruction. Schumpeter. And I said, yes, I know. That was a Marxist term, though, before he used it. And he said, I said, would you please explain, this is in front of about 1,000 broke raisin farmers. Would you explain the morality of what you just said? He said, there's three good things about us not having tariffs and letting EU, the market will adjudicate. I said, well, how will it adjudicate? This was kind of like this. He said, number one, you will learn how to make a profit on $400. I said, you can't do it. There's no way in the world. It costs $900 to $1,000. I said, we prune our own vines. We do everything ourselves. We live like peasants. You cannot do it. Some people will do it. They may be vertically integrated, but they will do it. And I said, number two, the consumer will get a cheaper product. And number three, Europe will go broke, because if this is as uneconomical, you say, and the governments are I said they will subsidize it forever because they have no defense budget. So I was torn, because obviously free markets make all of us wealthier, and they have to exist. And history shows that anybody that doesn't do that is not a free market capitalist, suffers, the poor. But we were confronted with a new system where you had these large foreign conglomerates, the EU that was not playing by the rules, and China. And we were told, as we went into the 80s, Free to Choose came out in 1980. We had 32 years of great governors in California, Reagan, Mason, Wilson, kind of Schwarzenegger. So it was a mood that our free market had won. And then even Bill Clinton was a free market person. And then we had the new millennium, and all of a sudden, these towns that I saw, all of a sudden the Del Monte Cannery was broken to 1,000 people out in my town. All of a sudden Fruhoff Trailer went broke, another 1,000 jobs. All of a sudden Upright Harvester went broke. And it was China, outsourcing, offshoring. And when people looked at what happened to the countryside, so on the street that I still live on, there were 7 farmhouses with families of 3 or 4. They all did the work. There was a value in that, is what I'm saying. Today, on my right, there's a chop shop and cockfighting in one of the farmhouses. Across the street from us, there's 9 trailers. 40 people live there, most undocumented. And M13 is fighting with the Serranos gang across the alleyway. And the SWAT team comes out all the time. And the land has all been conglomerated by two almond growers. One owns 16,000 acres, and the other one owns 12,000, and they rent the farmhouses out to people who are newly arrived. So my point is, in the abstract, yes, we have to have free market, but what's hurting the Republican cause is when a George W. Bush says, we've really got to get capital gains tax down. And so Donald Trump comes along and Jeb Bush says, we got to get capital gains down. We got to get corporate tax. And they're right in the abstract, but they had no empathy of the carnage that swept through the middle of the country.
When you grew up in Selma, there was town after town after town in the Central Valley that was like a Jeffersonian dream come true.
It's just like heaven.
Small farms, acreage in the tens, not hundreds, but tens of acres. Families that had worked the land. What generation are you?
Sixth.
Sixth generation.
Same
Families that had
house.
worked the land for generations. Schools that functioned. Families that were intact. A sense of community life. And free trade wiped it out.
I don't want to be dramatic, but of the people in my 5 square miles, 3 of them blew their brains out. One, my best friend, hung himself, blew his brains out, and took drugs and turned on the pickup in his garage to make sure he did it 4 ways. And I went to the Federal Land Bank because my twin brother went broke, my older brother went broke, everybody went broke. And I said to the Federal Land Bank, can I get a loan? He said, if you want to farm, don't farm. If you want to keep the land, you have a PhD, go teach. So I did. And if you don't farm, you can have a farm. And then he said, get big or get out.
Right.
And so there was no realization on the defenders of free market, which we have to have because the other socialism doesn't work. Even the French agrarian patchwork's wonderful, but we have to have some balance. But I'm trying to explain why somebody as crude as Donald Trump came through. And when he came to...
People said, yeah, that makes sense to me.
He did. He came to Tulare, California in 2016. I wasn't there. I asked everybody there. I said, did he have the caterpillar hat and the straw in his mouth and get the hay bales and get the fake San Joaquin Valley accent? And he said, no. I said, what did he do? He said he had a suit. He was sweating. He had an awful Queens accent. It was exactly like you see him on TV. And he used the word we all the time. We farmers, we're going to beat this. We're going to get the Chinese. It was kind of demagoguery, but it resonated to people.
Cared about them.
He cared.
So, Victor, this is just occurring to me. This isn't here, not that it matters. That's what markets did. Here's a question about what we all see coming. Artificial intelligence. Klarna, if I have the name correct. Phone banks apparently are done. Klarna took announced that it had taken 75% of its costs out of its order fulfillment. And what that means is they laid off people because this work can be done by artificial intelligence. All right, those are relatively low-level people. In some basic way, that doesn't quite hit home. But now let me tell you a story that in the writers' strike down in Hollywood, that was very hard to settle. I am told by friends who work in that town. It used to be the case that if you had a sitcom, if you had a running show of any kind, you had a writer's room that you would, the Simpsons cartoon show always ran 2 writers' rooms at once. And a writer's room would be 7 to a dozen kids. They were kids usually. And you would think that these would be the last people computers could replace. They were paid for their wit, for their facility with words, for their ability to produce unexpected situations. And then my friend, sitting in front of a computer, gave instructions to artificial intelligence to produce a 5-minute skit for Saturday Night Live in which Joe Biden and Donald Trump were playing beer pong. And about 20 seconds later, that script came up. And it had half a dozen gags. So Already what they all know in Hollywood is that all you need now is a senior writer to rewrite. And you don't need those half a dozen kids from fancy schools who are paid for wit and creativity and imagination. So AI is already coming after us. The politics of this will be different because it's going up, it's white collar jobs that are at threat now. So the question is, what is the moral thing to do? Try to predict people who are going to be sectors that are going to be
No, because
disrupted, and then try to
market-
slow it down, or let the market rip? How
Well,
do
the
you?
market is always smarter than government or we are, but we have to have a light touch of regulation. And where that is, I'm on the Bradley Foundation board, and all we do at every meeting, we get, I would call it the AEI grant type free markets, or the Cato Institute, and then we get the Heritage now under Kevin Roberts. The kind of, well, free markets.
Populist.
Yes, and we fight like dogs on the board. And everybody is conservative, but nobody can find what you're asking. What is the proper moral case to preserve a way of life or decency? Because when you unleash imports, or when you have offshores, or when you
New technology.
or you have the new technology, the price is just, I mean, if you looked at where I live compared to 1965, you would have think somebody had dropped a neutron bomb. We used to have mosquito abatement. We had the animal officer came to every farm to make sure the dogs were. I was riding a bike not too long ago. 5 dogs came out of one of these compounds. They bit me, and everybody said, "I have no idea. It's your problem. We don't know if they have rabies or not. It's your problem." I said, "Well, there's no rule. There's nothing. It's just completely wild." And if you want to see a farm, and I rented my small 45 acres to a guy who owns 12,000 acres.
Oh, really?
When I farmed it, you couldn't compare the production that I got with what he gets. It is the most sophisticated thing. I'm just he came to me and said, "I'm going to have a 10,000 acre block in your area, and your 40 acres fits in this quadrant, so that when we turn, we don't turn the tractor for almost 3/4 of a mile, because you waste that little bit of turning." And he has hydrometers. There's nobody in the orchard. A hydrometer down in the ground turns the pump on and off.
At each tree?
Yeah, it's just automatic. I've never seen anybody in
We're
it.
talking about almond trees.
Almonds, everything. There's no labor. The machine. There's no thinning. There's no pruning. The harvest. One guy comes through. I used to do it with a club when I was a kid, but it's the most efficient. And the thing is, there are now 2 years of supplies of almonds rotting down in the port of LA, because and the price has gone from $4.50 to $1.50 a pound, and they're pulling them out. But my point is, if anybody who's a romantic farm agrarian would say, well, we as stewards, family farmers, were really producing, they're not right. This is so much more efficient. It's almost godless. There's nobody there. I look out in the orchard, it's like it's alive. It just produces. And everything is mechanized or electronic or on the internet. So it's a dilemma, because we're producing and giving cheaper product all the time at more efficiency, but the social cost is that the land is not used for anything but cheap food, where it used to raise families.
Right.
And we are dire need of a nuclear family renaissance in this country.
Speech, markets versus morality. Now before the Supreme Court, Murphy versus Missouri. The case was brought by several states and individuals, including one of the plaintiffs is Jay Bhattacharya. Is Scott Atlas a plaintiff as well? He may well be, I'm not sure. They claim that their right to free speech was violated when social media platforms removed or shadow banned their posts after pressure from government officials during the COVID pandemic. The Biden administration counters that it has the right, the government has the right to communicate with platforms to combat misinformation. Justice Jackson, Supreme Court Justice Jackson, poses a hypothetical during oral arguments, and she says, imagine an online teen challenge that encourages teenagers to jump out of windows at increasing elevations. Could government authorities declare such an event a public health emergency, encouraging social media platforms to take down that content? Counsel for plaintiffs replied the government could use the bully pulpit, but not pressure or direct social platforms to remove such content. And that answer to Justice Jackson got wide coverage because it just didn't sit right. Victor?
There's no consistent with all these issues. In the case of trade, I think there was a need for government to make sure that unfair, quote, free trade that was mercantile and predatory didn't destroy, which it has. But in the free speech, I think conservatives who used to when I was a student, everybody was worried about pornography and free speech, and the left abused free speech, we thought. But now the argument's the other way. Because of this AI or the internet, when you look at a Google search, all the Google results are calibrated for political reasons. They really are. And same thing with the FBI, US contractors. 11 FBI agents retired, went right to work for the old Twitter. They were involved in all sorts of things. So I think now the conservative position is it's getting more and more to be a free speech purist and to protect free speech and to be very skeptical of what government, because if you look at what the FBI has done, the CIA, the DOJ, I think whatever excesses happen with free speech, libel, and I've been a victim of a lot of people who've said things about me that are not true, but I err on the side of free speech at all costs. I really do.
Got it. Okay, let me return to Selma one more time. Markets versus mandates at the borders. Again, two quotations. Here's Milton Friedman, another Hoover fellow, keeping this within these walls as much as I can. This is Milton in 1977, quote, "Illegal Mexican immigration is a good thing. It's a good thing for the illegal immigrants. It's a good thing for the United States. It's the closest thing to a pre-1914 immigration that's possible in today's welfare state," close quote. Well, you know the second quotation, it's Donald Trump. "When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. We need to build a big, beautiful wall." Which position is more moral?
We had a wonderful system at the end of 2020. We had finally—
4 years of Donald Trump.
Yes. We had finally replaced some of the bad wall with good wall. We were just starting the new wall. We stopped catch and release. We were committed to 500,000 legal immigrants. We could audit them. Many of them had English skills, etc. And we blew all of that up.
We meaning the Biden administration.
When it says that I need the tools, that's a complete fabrication. You can go on, look at the tape of Mayorkas bragging how he dismantled catch and release, refugee status, the wall. So this was a deliberate effort to let in 10 million people for political purposes. I could go at length at that, but to get to your point, I have a Milton Friedman story. I came here in 2003, and a donor asked me if I would debate Milton Friedman, because I had written a book called Mexifornia. So he rented a restaurant in San Francisco and had his friends, and we went up there.
You and Milton?
Milton. I didn't know him. I was very honored to be in the same room with him. And he was still, it was 20 years after Free to Choose, but that was still the age of Milton Friedman. And he'd said that. And he said in the opening statement, he said, I'll never forget it. He said, "We have to let the market adjudicate." I said, "Could you explain that?" He said, "Well, wages now for stoop labor are about $5 an hour."
What kind of labor?
Stoop.
Meaning picking low crops?
Anything.
Okay.
He meant muscular.
I see, all right.
But he said, when we let all of these people in, it's going to go down to $1. And the market will adjudicate. So when it gets down to $1, it won't be that much incentive. So the market will tell you how many people we need in the United States. And when the market says it's not lucrative, people will stop coming. Or when Mexico becomes affluent by osmosis, they'll need their people. Everything he said had a logic to it. And I just politely said, well, you're living in Nob Hill, and I'm living right in the middle of it. Do you have any idea of the social, cultural consequences of letting in 2 million people from Oaxaca, Chiapas, who come with no skills, no background?
And often don't even speak Spanish.
Yes,
They speak
and
an Indian.
deal with them. Have you ever seen a dead person on your property? Have you ever had somebody shoot at you? Have you ever had somebody break into your house with your family? Have you ever had to put a shotgun in a person's face because he was a Norteños gang member? Have you ever called the sheriff, Milton, and have them say, we'll be there in 2 hours? That's what happens when you let people from the poorest place in the United States come into the most sophisticated society, and at a time when the sophisticated society does not believe anymore in the melting pot, assimilation, integration. And I said to him, Milton, I'm speaking as somebody whose older brother is married to a Mexican-American immigrant who came legally, and my other brother has 2 Mexican-American children from his first wife, and we're a multiracial family. And it bounced right off him. And I was appalled, but I respect him because he was such a brilliant guy. But I think a lot of the problems with the Republican Party is it was in the abstract, and we had all of these people with these great theories, and somewhere along they didn't see what was happening in the middle of the country. I just reviewed this book, White Rural Rage, by 2 leftists. It's the most intellectually dishonest book I've ever read. It really is. But when you look at the statistics of what globalization did, what group has the greatest drop in life expectancy in the United States? It's white males. What group died at twice their numbers in the demographics in Iraq and Afghanistan? It's white males. What group has the highest suicide rate? White males. What group accounts for 75% of the fentanyl deaths? White male. And where do these people live? They live in the so-called Rust Belt, rural America, small town America. And they're the targets of anger at this book because this book says they've all become illiberal and are voting against their true Marxist interests because they're racist and xenophobes and Christians. So what I'm getting at is that this global project was a bicoastal project. And people who had international skills in the media and academia and finance and tech woke up one morning and they had a market of 8 billion people. And they made $9 trillion of market capitalization in Silicon Valley. And the people who were dependent on assembly and manufacturing and farming and mining, muscular labor could be outsourced much easier or outsourced. And they took it like you wouldn't believe. They were wiped out culturally. So it was East Palestine, Ohio, that Biden wouldn't even go visit. And nobody in the Republican Party was aware of it. And the worst thing is, it was sort of, well, they were losers. So they need to, as Joe Biden said, they need to code. Or Hillary said, we're going to put all you miners out of business. And I would just say, go to Selma, California, Fowler, California, Reedley, California, and just drive through those places and look at these abandoned manufacturing plants, packing houses, see what it's like.
My last question then. You talked about the conflict in the Bradley Foundation when you're making grants these days. You've got different kinds, flavors almost, different themes in conservatism. So let me, again, a handful of quotations, and then I'll just hand it over to you. Here's a statement of classical liberalism. This is the kind of conservative that until the day before yesterday we all thought we were. Ronald Reagan, quote, "Man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts." All right? That's one statement. Now let me give you a handful of statements of a different kind of idea of the proper role of government. And every one of these is from a figure who would describe himself as conservative. Patrick Deneen, political scientist at Notre Dame, argues that liberalism has failed because it has achieved its core principles of individualism. We must, quote, reorient values away from the individual and back toward the community. Patrick Deneen, Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, I want investment in industry for America's national security interest. He wants an industrial policy. Milton Friedman is somewhere spinning in his, well, actually he was cremated and sprinkled over the Pacific, but somewhere out there he's bobbing up and down. Adrian Vermeule, Harvard Law School, quote, substantive moral principles should be read into the, quote, majestic generalities and ambiguities of the Constitution, close quote. Vermeule even insists that we should be willing to legislate morality, close quote. All right, so we've got limited government, the classical statement, Ronald Reagan conservatism, and then this more recent thing where and Reagan is a purely negative view of liberty. Liberty is defined by what the government may not do to you. And now we have conservatives arguing for a more assertive government in the name of community, in the name of industry and national security, even in the name of morality itself. Are these small heresies, or is something new coming into being here, Victor?
I think it's a well-meant but ill-conceived effort on the national conservatives to start getting government into morality, legislation, national religion. In theory, I'm sympathetic, but there's no historical record that it ever works. So what we need, and Reagan was right about government. We've got 2.5 million people working for the federal government. To go back to the raisin image, we still have a raisin government bureau that owns your raisins. So when I was farming raisins and the price went to 400, I decided not to even either send them to the cow feed or see if I could move 200 tons at farmer's market. I moved 2 tons. But we washed and stemmed them ourselves, processed them. And the government came in and said, you don't own those. You have to go turn them in because we have to give 70% reserve tonnage free to Europe. We call reserve tonnage to limit the market. So what I'm getting, it was a disaster. It made a bad, I said we might as well let us go broke and let the free market operate. But my point is, there has to be some reconciliation of the Reagan view with, you want limited government, but you want to be very aware of what a rampant globalized free market can do to your country. So when J.D. Vance says we need somebody to make artillery shells, and somebody else says, well, it's cheaper to make them in, I don't know, Venezuela. That's wrong. You need to pay a higher economic price for strategic, I think everybody agrees with that.
Right.
The same thing about morality is we have to be very tolerant of people who are transgendered, gay, but the fact is historically the nuclear family should be recognized as the muscles of the whole society. It doesn't mean they're the smart, it's just that if you don't have a 2-parent with children, you're not going to make it. Fertility-wise.
And we have centuries
yes, that's
that
just,
indicate that.
So what we need to do is, without growing government, you can give incentives for people for child care credit. We're doing that. But the point is that the Republicans, when they got into the laissez-faire, they didn't use the bully pulpit. Maybe they were scared of the left to talk about values, or they only did it in a narrow religious. I would have liked to see a Republican politician say, I'm very tolerant of different lifestyles, but we've got to support these people that nobody cares about, they get up and they're up all night with children, and they have both parents and they stay married, or they keep married, or if they divorce, they get remarried, but they're the people that we have to promote, and they can do it in ways that are, they don't have to outlaw all types of pornography, but they can say things like, don't waste your time. They can say things, and they don't do it, partly because they're imbued with the free market, purism that's almost intolerant. Just let the market decide. And the market is amoral, meaning it's neither good or bad. And it's not in our hands anymore because of this globalized project. And we've got, the other final fillip is, we've got a 1.4 million person China that's godless and evil. And it has an agenda to destroy the West, in general, and the United States in particular. So whether it's a bio lab that turns up in Reedley, California, where I used to work in a packing house, I wake up one day and they say they've got anthrax, Ebola, and COVID in this packing house and 200 genetic engineered rats 11 miles from my house, and the Chinese Communist affiliate was running it. Or you have 25,000 people coming across the border. We have no idea why they're coming.
25,000 Chinese nationals.
Chinese males of male age. Or we've got them threatening to, they want to, and the idea that you would allow them to have absolutely asymmetrical trade or technology transfers is a pact of suicide. Free market economics is not a suicide pact. So we need to tell the Chinese, we don't need to have high tariffs. All we have to do is that we have a policy, whatever you do to us, we will do to you. And you decide what you want to do. And we will copy it. And they will not like that. And so I think as little government as possible and far more editorialization and commentary from the conservatives on the moral crisis that we're in. And just because something is legal doesn't mean you should do it. And we're not getting that from anybody.
Where is Terry Anderson? We're coming up on 1 o'clock. Do we have time for a question or two, or do you need to move? Questions? All right.
The paradox of your argument is that government actions created the initial problem, the destruction of Jeffersonian democracy. It was the EU and then the US policies.
Yes.
So these were strong government policies.
Yes.
So how can you retrieve the situation without countervailing strong government policies?
That's what I was trying to say. I'm confused about it because we had the ambassador to Greece come in 1980, right during this crisis, and it was right when the Turkish crisis, and he was lecturing us why...
He was American
he
or
was,
Greek?
No, he's a Greek-American. He came to Fresno, and a lot of us went to hear him, and he was lecturing us on the United States. He was a socialist from the PASOK government.
I see.
Papandreou. And he kept lecturing us that we shouldn't butt into European affairs. And I just asked him a question. I said, I don't want to butt in your affairs, so don't butt in ours and dump Greek raisins with an $800 subsidy and then make us defend you. So you're right, it was government policies that we could have easily stopped that. So government's not, it's also amoral. The bigger it is, the greater the propensity that can be immoral. But if you can limit it, it has a chief role to protect the sovereignty and security of its own citizens.
Thank you. Well, another question here, with a microphone on the way to you.
Hi, I'm Dhaval. I'm a computer science alumni. The question I had is, one is a very short one, but maybe you have a very insightful answer. You said about freedom of speech at all costs. I'm also pro-speech, but where do different people draw lines at different places? Where do you draw that line? It's really all costs. Obviously, at some point you're harming somebody, so where do you draw the line? And the second question I had was about the AI. He mentioned about AI coming up. Is there any thing specific to AI? And you talked about a farm being already quite automated and stuff. You don't see any employees regularly. So specific to AI, is there anything going to be different?
Well, as far as free speech, there is no, give you an example what the danger of it is. Right now, we were told in the 60s when we were all younger, my age, that the right was endangering free speech, McCarthyism, et cetera, and they were not letting artistic freedom and nudity, and the left was a big, but the problem is when the left is against free speech, and that it poses as the equity party or the party of the people. It's much harder to criticize. And they believe that free speech is hate speech. So whenever I have been at a university and have said something that has nothing to do with race, for example, they say hate speech. You're peddling hate speech. So if you say the SAT was a valuable tool to let people who didn't have access to power or influence and were in the Midwest, and if they got an 800, they could go to Stanford or Harvard, that was hate speech. As far as AEI, all these tools are just, it reminds me, I asked my grandfather once, he turned on the electric pump. He got a big 15 horse, 1,000 gallons came out, the head was this big. And then we walked back home and we had the old hand pump in the yard, 3 gallons. And he said to me, does the water taste any different? And what he was trying to say is that things just stay, human nature is the same, and the nature, but it's the delivery. So AI is either bad or good, but it's not the technology itself. It just speeds stuff up. Ultimately, AI is going to be produced by people about 10 miles away. And the degree to which it's a good or bad thing is going to depend on the purposes and the operation and the methodology that those people infuse into it. And people like them. And if I could editorial, I don't have a lot of confidence in those people.
One more question right here.
Yeah, thank you very much. You did a really good job explaining in a graphic way how the Rust Belt and the white working class, came to support Trump. There have been some really interesting polls recently. So I saw one last week that has now Trump winning with Gen Z and losing among boomers. So that's one version. And his polling is
I
Trump.
get confused. Boomers are older. Boomers are Victor and me, and Gen Z is younger.
Yeah, so Trump.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Trump is now, according to this recent poll, losing among you guys and winning among people younger than me. Right. I'm actually not Gen Z. I'm just a millennial with a young face. But and similar thing on race. So Trump is polling around almost 20% with Black Americans. I don't think the Republicans have ever won more than 10% in decades. Ron DeSantis won the Hispanic vote in Florida in the last election. So how do you explain that in the context of what you were describing earlier?
Part of it is cultural. What's happening, and I live in a town that's 90% Hispanic, and I've been doing a poll, my wife and I, every time we see a Latino male over 20, we ask them about something, which is everybody. And I would say 75% are overt now that they're going to vote for Trump. They
really?
In 2020, that was the opposite. And what I could describe it is the Black and Latino community are starting to emulate the white working class's attitude about white elites. So when you talk to Latinos and Blacks, they look at the Squad, or they look at Fannie Willis, or they look at Claudine Gay, the way white people looked at, say, Hillary Clinton. They don't like to be talked down to by people that say they're illiberal because they're paying $5.50 a gallon for gas, and their Latino legislature from Marin County or something is telling them they have to have a third bathroom, or that men should be in female sports, or they have to have an open border when all of a sudden in our hometown these buses come at night, dump people, and suddenly we're not going to have advanced placement because we have to have English as a second language. So it's a class, and it's very interesting to watch as class is starting to replace race in an ecumenical fashion. If Trump, for all the bad things he may have done or will do, the one good thing he's doing in a very counterintuitive way, in a way that Bush didn't and Romney didn't, McCain didn't, he's starting to substitute class for race, and you're starting to see people of different races that are starting to have a middle class attitude, and I think that reflects this growing minority It's a backlash at elites, but it's even their own elites they don't listen to anymore because they think they're just like nasal-sounding NPR white elites. And then as far as the generations go, it's hard to tell because on some issues, I just looked at a poll on Israel. The Gen X is overwhelmingly anti-Israel, but the boomers are overwhelmingly pro-Israel. And yet when you look at the two candidates, that should be just the opposite, according to what you just said. So I'm not sure that those polls are accurate, but young people I know, because I talk to a lot of them in that area where I live, their biggest complaint is they'll come out and work on your house. I had a welder come out to do some farm welding, and I have an old farmhouse, but I remodeled it. I could never get that. I could never get that. I said, well, you're getting $20 an hour. So they take half of it. I could never get that. And they can't buy a house. They can't afford to buy a new car. I bought a new pickup. He said, how much is that? I said, I got a good deal. It was $76,000. He said, I can't afford $15,000. So this young generation feels like it was robbed, and it's angry. $2 trillion in student loans, with half of them shouldn't have never been in college. They have worthless psychology or sociology or environmental studies degrees. They're unemployable. They should have had trade schools, but they're angry. They can't afford anything. They can't get married. They can't have children. So the age when people were married has gone from first marriage 26 to 31, first child from 29 to 34, number of children 2002 I think it was 2.1, and it's down to almost 1.65 in just 20 years. So this whole generation is not marrying, they're not buying homes, they're not having children, and they're losing real wages, at least until recently. And they're angry and they're lashing out. And I don't know where that's going to be directed. But I'm very skeptical that they're going to stick with the Biden agenda because they feel that they were better off. As far as the older people, I think that just to finish very quickly, Donald Trump's crudity bothers them more than the young people. The young people say, well, we talk like that too, he's crazy, we like nutty people, or we just look at, but the older people will say things like, he had a wonderful agenda, but why did he call Nikki Haley bird brain? He didn't have to do that. Why doesn't he just stop that? I can't, not in my name. I'm not going to put my imprimatur on him. He's so crude. And I think that explains a lot of it. The baby generation boom is worried about manners and decorum to a much greater degree than younger people. And Donald Trump socially it's unacceptable to say that you'd like to vote for Donald Trump if you're over 60. Even though I think by any empirical standard, you looked at his 4 years compared to now, foreign policy, crime, the border, interest rates, it was much more successful. And
Terry Anderson, who outranks me, just went like this. Ladies and gentlemen, let's say thanks to Victor.